been talking a lot about ecosystems for the last few weeks, and now we're going to dive into something a little deeper. So we've talked about the different types of ecosystems and the way that ecosystems function, but we're now going to talk about the different ways that ecosystems can change over time. Just because an ecosystem starts one way doesn't mean it necessarily ends that way. There are a lot of different things that can happen that will cause an ecosystem to change. One thing that changes ecosystems are animals. Ecosystems are being changed by all sorts of natural consequences like wind and water, but animals cause a lot of it. Some examples of how they might change ecosystems include these few examples. So a swarm of locusts might come into the environment and feed on all of the plants. There could be a plague of locusts where they fly in from another area and they eat up all of the plants. There are a lot of ways that this can change the ecosystem, right? Because we have herbivores. Those are animals that need to eat plants. If the locusts eat all of the plants, then those herbivores won't have anything to eat. Then they'll die, and then the carnivores that would have eaten them are now malnourished. So that's one thing that can definitely change an ecosystem. Excuse me. Another thing that could change an ecosystem is maybe a beaver building a dam. They do this to protect themselves from predators. So what happens is if you look here at this picture, you'll notice this, this little guy right here. So this crosses the stream or river, and it has a bunch of sticks and stones, kind of creates a land bridge. Now, this creates a safe enclosure for the beavers and for other animals too. So some animals might be able to use this as a place to stay safe and to live longer, which can definitely change the ecosystem because some of the carnivores might not be able to get to their prey. Now, it can also change the ecosystem because this high concentration of water could actually be harmful to different species like insects. So all of these things can definitely change an ecosystem very quickly. People change ecosystems. We do this all the time. Sometimes people will cut down forests in order to make room to build more houses. All of this can change the environment vastly. If we're cutting down forests, then we're destroying environments and ecosystems that other animals and organisms were using for their homes. Then when we build our homes there, the sounds can scare off a lot of the animals, so they're going to flee to a different environment. We also throw out a ton of garbage, and we're going to talk a little bit later about how that can affect our ecosystems. Something else that can really change our ecosystems is when we bring in new species. This can happen accidentally or it can happen on purpose. A lot of the species that we have in the United States are here naturally, which means that before people even showed up, this was what our ecosystem was born with. But sometimes people can introduce new organisms that will change an ecosystem. If you look at this picture, you're going to see something really weird looking. It's a clam with a bunch of things stuck onto it. These things are called zebra mussels. Obviously, they're not zebras, but they're a sort of creature that lives in the water. Now, these were accidentally introduced to the United States when they were clinging to the bottoms of ships. So this organism comes from the other side of the world, and at some point in our history, when a ship was coming from the other side of the world to the United States, some zebra mussels clung to the bottom. They made the whole trip with us, and then they ended up in the United States, where they hadn't been there before. They are not naturally part of our ecosystem. But because they're not part of this ecosystem, there are no animals or organisms in our environment that feed on the zebra mussels. So this meant that the population grew very, very quickly, which very much changed our ecosystem. Something else that was introduced was garlic mustard plant. But this, unlike the zebra mussels, which were introduced on accident, these were introduced on purpose. The early settlers brought this plant to the United States in order to use for food and medicine. But again, the animals from our ecosystem aren't used to this organism, so they weren't eating this plant, which means it grew very, very quickly, and it made less room for some of our natural species. And then, of course, we've got our garbage and pollution. Did you know that Americans throw away 200 million tons of garbage a year? That is a lot of garbage. This garbage typically goes to a landfill. Now, we've learned our lesson and we've begun building landfills that make it harder for pollution to leak out into the ecosystem, but sometimes it's not always perfect, and not all landfills are sealed like this. The pollution can leak out and it can go into nearby ecosystems and poison plants and animals. So, of course, that can change them dramatically. All right, you can go ahead to the Google Classroom to answer some of those questions. And later this week, we're going to be talking about how species change.